Believe me, the content of the Rise of Nationalism in Europe is great. It covers a wide area of topics. But there is just one issue. The story of every country is a little mixed up. I know the chapter is about Europe, but still I thought, what if we take just one country's story in it? How about France? By creating a chain of events, I realized that the story of France is really interesting in this chapter. We can say this when we see this. This is how the condition of working class in Europe was in France almost 2.5 centuries ago. And now, mostly people are happy. It's so hard to imagine how this turned into this. So how they became free? To understand this, we must understand the revolution. And to understand the history of revolution, we must know the history of France. During and after the years of First Revolution in France, we must understand the suffering of the people under a monarch and how people revolted to end such an unjust rule. How still after the revolution, governments in France kept changing. Why every revolutionary changed nationalism, and who are these gentlemen who decided the course of France's history? And finally, what led to the ultimate revolution of 1848? So let's see this amazing story of France in Rise of Nationalism in Europe. It all started because of the working class like farmers, artisans and laborers. They had to serve their lords to get protection and permission to work on the land. People were not free as they are now. And shockingly, all this happened just because they were at the bottom of the societal structure of France. Before 1789, France's society was divided into three parts. At that time, the monarch belonged to the top tier. Then came the clergy and aristocrats. They were also called noblemen, while those who actually labored were considered the citizen with least value. By the second half of the 18th century in France, the merchant, industrialists and the professionals rose as wealthy urban middle class. These people were educated, so they were well aware that their political and economic powers were restricted because of the feudal system and the privileges of nobility and clergy. They also hated that in monarchy the king had the absolute power, and the transfer of rule was based on birth but not on merit or the ability of a ruler. Their education also helped them to know about the Enlightenment ideals of liberty, equality and fraternity. These principles inspired many of them to become revolutionaries, and then they started dreaming to participate in governance, having more economic freedom, and having a law which would see all the citizens as equal. But they knew that this could only be achieved by encouraging all the people to believe in a common identity. They had an idea for this. Well, they started creating concepts for everybody. For this, they developed the ideals of La Patrie, which meant the fatherland, and La Citoyen, which meant the citizen. A new French flag, the tricolour, was also chosen to replace the former royal standard. And these measures actually worked. These methods quickly became popular, even among other urban working classes and the peasantry. Now, the life of a peasantry and the working class was already very bad under the old regime, so the movement gained traction. The effect of all this led to what you already know as the conversion of Third Estate into National Assembly. The revolution, which started in 1789, created a constitutional monarchy in 1791. Under this constitution, the king's powers were reduced and constantly checked by the National Assembly. However, this was in fact the start of a very hard decade for France. The king was taken as a prisoner shortly after. He was accused of disloyalty. On one hand, the monarchy was abolished and replaced by the First French Republic in 1792. On the other, France still struggled with political and military chaos. By 1793, the revolution entered its darkest turn when the Committee of Public Safety, mainly dominated by radical Jacobians under Maximilien Robespierre, started governing the country. This rule was brutal. Anybody who opposed the rule was termed as enemy and was executed on guillotine. Even Louis XVI got guillotined, followed by his wife Marie Antoinette. This period came to be known as the Reign of Terror, as no one could criticize the committee. All this while, France still faced extreme economic, political and military instability. Robespierre's downfall came in July 1794, which led to the establishment of a new constitution called the Directory. But its story was not very fruitful either. It allowed corruption and inefficiency in the governance, thus finally allowing the entry of one man, Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon was a very famous military general. He staged a coup in 1799 and overthrew the Directory, making a new constitution under which he became the first Council of France. Under him, the French territories expanded to new boundaries. The French military in expansion grew stronger for the next decade. His rule brought significant changes, both good and bad. On the positive side, he introduced the Napoleonic Code, which did away with all the privileges based on foreign birth. Now, nobody could enjoy special rights just because of being born in a royal society. He also established equality before the law and secured the right to property. Napoleon simplified administrative divisions, abolished the feudal system, and freed peasants from serfdom and manorial dues. In short, he made work smooth and also freed peasants from serving lords. In the towns too, guild restrictions were removed by him. Previously, through these guilds, local artisans and merchants would impose monopoly on a local market. It stopped merchants and artists from different towns to trade, so widespread trade became harder and complicated. So by abolishing it, Napoleon opened up the trade. Similarly, transport and communication systems were improved too. In short, Napoleon proved to be an excellent administrative leader, as he made systems smooth, which led to better economic growth for people, especially the middle class. In short, he restored order in France, which had been going through a chaotic political and economic administration in those years. But he also did many unpopular things. He took the political freedom away from people, he increased the taxation, imposed censorship, and as his vision was to conquer the whole Europe, he forcibly admitted people into armies. In the countries he went, first the people welcomed him as an angel of freedom, but then taxation and the forced army admission made them unhappy. Napoleon was very strong now, and it became important for the neighboring European powers to defeat him. Britain, Russia, Prussia, and Austria formed coalition, and fighting together they finally defeated Napoleon in 1815.
Following this, a settlement for Europe was drafted at Vienna, and it came to be known as the Congress of Vienna.
The European monarchies now wanted the changes brought by Napoleonic Wars to be undone. The Bourbon dynasty was restored to power in France. France lost the territories it had annexed under Napoleon. Finally, it was restricted to this. Also, a series of states were set up on the boundaries of France to prevent French expansion in the future. The Kingdom of Netherlands, which included Belgium, was set up in the north. Genoa was added to Piedmont in the south. Prussia was given important new territories on its western frontiers, while Austria was given control of northern Italy. The Confederation of the Rhine, which was formed by Napoleon, was hardly modified. However, with the inclusion of Austrian and Prussian borders, it just got expanded. Finally, in the east, Russia was given a part of Poland. From then on, the story of Bourbon rule begins. The period between 1815 to 1830 was the Bourbon Restoration. Louis XVIII started the reign, followed by Charles X. Both were brothers of Louis XVI. Under Louis XVIII, a constitutional monarchy was followed. His position was moderate. On one side, his rule did not object to the changes done under Revolution and Napoleon's rule. On the other hand, he favored church and aristocrats. Most of the aristocrats who fled during the Revolution and Napoleon's rule started migrating back. These aristocrats were conservatives and wanted the old regime to be back, whereas the liberals wanted the revolution's value to continue. Due to this, a tension started between them and the liberals. This started unrest among the middle and the working class against the regime. Also, the monarchs did not tolerate criticism and dissent. It started with Louis XVIII, but when Charles X took the reign, conservativeness grew even more. The newspapers, books, plays, and songs all were censored. The ideas of liberty and freedom were stopped from spreading. This anonymous caricature became famous for reflecting this. It was called the Club of Thinkers. Here, a group of thinkers who were intellectuals and journalists are sitting to discuss and critique, but their mouths are covered, which means they are silenced and censored. Through this, they wanted to convey how the freedom of press was suppressed during this period. It did not take long for tides to turn again. A new hero emerges, Louis Philippe, a leader who was seen as more sympathetic to liberal reforms. People even termed him as Citizen King because he was raised in middle class and was in favor of constitutional monarchy. Because the liberal revolutionaries were not happy with the censorship on press and the voting rights of the middle class, they revolted again. In July 1830, a revolt known as the July Revolution overthrew another absolutist monarch, the Bourbon King Charles X, and replaced Louis Philippe as the new monarch under a constitutional monarchy. The new king did few reforms. Suffrage was expanded, yet it was still limited to wealthy people. The censorship on press was relieved, but the administration still did not tolerate political dissent. Soon the usual problems of corruption and voting rights became an issue. But the main issue was the widespread discontent among peasantry. They were already facing extreme economic hardship due to the lack of jobs and money. In 1848, what came to be known as the February Revolution, a large population of France marched on streets and erected barricades to show their protest. They were against the inefficiency of the government, which did not pay attention to their needs. Finally, Louis Philippe had to flee and a republic was proclaimed. This republic was made of a national assembly and granted universal male suffrage, which meant now the voting rights were not limited to only wealthy. Every adult male could vote now. This gave a great power to all the men who have been struggling to get this right for decades. However, it is also a sad fact that women, in spite of their immense contribution, had to struggle for their voting rights until much later, that is 1944.